everyone take a guess as to who is going to become a Mexican in the second half of the year. Hello, everyone. My name is Alex. You are listening to the Stagger Stance podcast, where I talk about all things stand-up paddleboarding, personal lifestyle. Also, I look like a little grandma with my little cardigan on. I feel very cute. And I also dyed my hair. Look at that, beautiful blue and purple, and I am praying that the blue does not bleed and soak into my skin when I am competing this weekend, because the last time I dyed my hair blue, I turned into a literal Smurf. But anyways, appreciate the hair. Hello everyone, I just wanted to pop in here really quick just to explain. I filmed this episode at the end of February, like 25th, 26th of February, and now it is the 12th of March, so I am kind of behind in posting this episode. So if you are confused as to what I'm talking about, whether it be the competition that I just mentioned or talking about how this whole thing happened a few days ago, it is because I did film this at the end of February. But okay, let's get into this episode. And this episode I'm going to talk about my process as to how I have been working on becoming a Mexican citizen. This has been a conversation in my family for a very long time, because obviously I've grown up ever since I was 6 here in Mexico, and we've kind of gone through the process of becoming a tourist, a temporary resident, and a permanent resident, right? Like, we've gotten our green card, we are legally allowed to stay here, and the topic of getting a passport or becoming a citizen never really popped up until I joined the Jalisco State Federation for a competition. And once that happened, the topic or the discussion of getting a passport and possibly representing Mexico in the future showed up. But at that time, I was 16, and if you wanted to become a Mexican citizen as a minor, you'd have to get it with your parents. And my parents, nothing against them, they just weren't qualified to become Mexican, in the sense of, like, you have to do like an exam to get in, and you have to know how to speak the language. And while they can get by, they are by no means fluent like my brother and I. And they've really lived in Mexico for a very small part of their lives. So it didn't really make sense to become Mexican citizens when they only lived in Mexico for a very short part of their life, whereas I grew up in Mexico for the majority of my life. So this conversation was kind of put off to the side for a while until I turned 18. And so ever since then, we've looked into starting the process of me becoming a Mexican. And so this is what the episode is going to be about. I want to talk about my experience. I currently now am not a Mexican, okay? I've sent in my request, and this episode is talking about me sending in my request and all the, oh my god, so many like issues and situations that I had to go through in order to do this. And I won't be receiving my Mexican citizenship until like earliest August. And that's if they don't ask us for any additional things throughout the creation process, if that makes sense. I'll get into some things and talk about how possibly might end up getting postponed, but we'll see. Or delayed, I should say. Not postponed, delayed. But anyways, let's get right into it. So, I turned 18. Wow. I'm an adult now, and now I can legally apply for citizenship without depending on my parents. And so we met up with a lawyer, and we had a lawyer throughout this entire process. And so what we had to do is that we had to make an appointment. And this appointment, we'd have to fly into Mexico City, right? And turn in all of this paperwork. But anyways, what we had to do is that we had to make the appointment, and I had to fly into Mexico City in order to take this appointment. And the appointment consists of bringing in all of your documents, bringing in like specific paperwork, specific documents. And so they would review your paperwork. If it was all fine, there's like 3 parts to the appointment, which I'm not realizing, it's really just like 2.5 parts of the appointment. First part is reviewing all your documents, and second part is the exam. Now, the exam, I actually recorded this episode a while back before I took my appointment that successfully got me into the application process. The exam was like my end game, if that makes sense. The exam was the thing I was most nervous about, and I'll get into it. But when I recorded this episode, I'm not going to release it because I'm re-talking about it now, and going to be a lot better at talking about it, because when I was talking about it, when I filmed that episode that I ended up not posting, I was like borderline like crying. I was like shaking. I was in tears, or not in tears, but I was like almost gonna cry because I was so extremely nervous for specifically this exam. And again, I'll talk about it in a few seconds, but like looking back on that episode that I filmed that I never edited, never posted, it was so sad seeing me like that. And that was like a week ago. And it just kind of shows the chokehold that this exam kind of had on me, which I'm going to complain about it, honestly. It's like so annoying what you have to go through to like prove to be a Mexican. But anyways, we made the appointment for November 17th. And me talking about this right now near the end of February, you're like, wait, November 17th? Yeah, so this was my first attempt. And so we booked a flight to Mexico City, and I had to study for this exam. And fortunately, like, thank goodness, there is an app that specializes in preparing people for this exam. So like they really did like the most that they could do in this app. There's two parts to the exam. There was history or general questions about Mexico, and then there was a Spanish exam, which kind of tested whether or not you spoke Spanish. And I wasn't worried about the Spanish exam. I was worried about the other exam where it talked about Mexican topics. I know the general things about Mexico, obviously, because I grew up here. Questions on this app were like absolutely like bonkers, right? And these were things that had been accepted as like things that you should study for this exam. It was on a qualified app, and these were the questions that I was told to study. Some of the questions were like absolutely bonkers. Like, do I really have to like study and figure out, just in case it comes up on the exam, what Russian communist Frida Kahlo had an affair with? Like, that was one of the questions on the app. I can like stay here and say that the person that she had an affair with was Leon Trotsky. But who actually, like, what person, just like general individual, knows that, unless they're like a big Frida Kahlo fan, or like they just found that random fact somewhere. So the app, when it comes to studying, the app is called Mexicanízame, like Mexicanize Me, and I thought that's really funny. And every time I tell people that, they always think it's super funny. But what they have is that they have like little questions. Well, they have sections, and let me just like go through the section. There's 5 sections of history. There's the pre-Hispanic history. There's the colonization history. There's the independence. There's the revolution, and then there's contemporary Mexican history. And inside, these consist of about like 50 to 70 questions each. And that's just the history. After that, there is traditions and culture, there's food, there's geography, there's literature, music, arts, film, science, sports, and government. And I studied all the questions in each of those sections, and it kind of amounted to around like 650 flashcards, which is insane. 650 questions to prepare for this exam, right? So you're probably thinking that it's a big exam. Like, there's all these questions that you have to study. You just have to like kind of prove that you know like most of these questions, right? The exam that I had to take to determine whether or not I become a Mexican citizen, it consisted of 10 questions. 650 flashcards that I had to study, and only 10 of them would be on the exam, and I had to get 8 of them right. I had to get 8. 80%. When I had to study everything about Mexico. And I studied so hard for this exam, but get this, you weren't even sure or not if these questions would actually be on the exam. You didn't know if the exam had been updated. You had no idea if there was a question that was going to be asked that wasn't in the app. I remember the first time I went in there, November 17th, there was other people with the same time for their appointment, and there's a guy who, like, it was like his 5th attempt, and I'll get into the attempts, how the attempts work in a second, but it was like his 5th attempt, and he was like talking to people about some of the questions that were on the exam, like what he had experienced before. And bear in mind, I was like so incredibly nervous for this appointment. This was like, again, back in November, and I was like, I studied super hard for this exam, and I was hearing him talking about some of the questions that he was asked, or just like a question that he brought up, and I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. It was a question, it was a person, it was just a topic that I had never heard about. It was not in the in the app, and I was absolutely terrified. And there was another instance later on, past my first attempt at this application process, where I was listening to a reel and they were talking about like, oh, this is what you have to do to become a Mexican, right? And there's like, oh, you have to take an exam and there's 10 questions, you have to get 8 of them right. And then in this reel, she said, these are like example questions of what could possibly be on this exam. And again, I had not heard a single question, topic, discussion of these questions in the app. And I was going through the comments, and everyone who, this reel was in Spanish, right? And so there were all these people from Mexico being like, well, then I guess I'm not Mexican because I don't even know this. And the entirety that I had been preparing for this exam for my first appointment, and also kind of like the in-between leading up to my second appointment, I would ask people some of these questions that were on this test. And there's a simulation exam on this app where it gives you 10 questions randomly. Like out of all the questions that are on this app, all the things that I had to study, all the flashcards, they give you 10. And you have to answer 8 of them right. And it just kind of tests your knowledge, if you know what I mean, and kind of puts you in the situation of the exam. And I would like make people do the exam, not make people do the exam, but like talk about it. And I'm like, you can try it. They're like, yeah, sure, I'll try it. And they would not be able to do it. There's a guy, he used to be a full-on teacher, and I would ask him like random questions from my study guide, and he'd be able to answer them, right? He'd be able to answer them. But when I made him do the simulation exam, he failed. He got 7 out of 10. And this is something that this is like very common for like a lot of other countries, right? When it comes to the citizenship process. I've started visiting Mexico when I was 9 months old. I moved here when I was 6. I did primary and middle school in Mexico. When I was in primary school, I did all the parades. I've celebrated Revolution Day. I've celebrated Independence Day. I've celebrated Day of the Dead. I know all of the special holidays and I celebrate them. I fluently speak the language, and I have many friends who speak the language, who live here. Outside of my house, I grew up in a very Mexican culture, right? Because I'm in Mexico. All of this, my dad put it pretty well. A 10-question trivia test is what's going to determine whether or not I become Mexican. And again, it happens with a lot of countries, and it's like this is the system that you're going to work with. So that's my beef with this exam. And so on top of the fact that this 10-question exam was going to determine whether or not I was going to become Mexican, I had no idea whether or not what I was studying was going to make me over-prepared or under-prepared. I had no idea if the questions in the app actually was preparing me for this exam. But anyways, that was like the main thing that I was worried about leading up to my very first appointment. And so what they do is that you have to have like a proof of appointment paper, and you go to this unmarked building. There's nothing that labels this building as like an official office for naturalization, And so you go up to the security guard, you kind of show them your paper, they have an appointment, they let you in, they check your bag, and then you just kind of sit there. You wait until they take attendance. They yell your name. And so when they yell your name, like, are you here? You have to raise your hand, like, yes, I'm here. And so then one by one, they will call your name up. And so I did this back in November 17th. And I walked up to them. I gave them my passport, my visa, and they looked at my visa. And this was in November. And they looked at my visa. They looked at me. They told me, like, your visa expires in February of 2024. And I'm like, yeah, it does. And she's like, your visa can't expire in the next 6 months. And I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, so you're not going to be able to continue with this process. You're going to have to make a new appointment. You're going to have to update your visa and then make a new appointment and come back in here. And I'm like, okay. And I was in like such shock that I was like borderline crying, right? I couldn't like say anything. I couldn't do anything. I was just like trying my hardest not to cry, because I studied my ass off. I flew over to Mexico City, got all the documents ready, only for them to reject me in the first minute by looking at one of my documents because of a situation that my lawyers didn't tell me about, which there's kind of like my beef with my own lawyers, right? They had no idea that this had to be a thing. Like, they had no idea that a visa couldn't expire in the next 6 months. And I was talking to my lawyer's assistant because he was there during the day kind of helping us. And he kind of like checked all of our documents before I went in there. And I had to go in there alone. No one else could go in there with me. And so like I left the building and I was crying and I called my dad and I was like they rejected me. Like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And he was with my lawyer's assistant because they were kind of just like waiting for me to finish my appointment. And so we regrouped and I told him what happened, why they rejected me. And my lawyer's assistant goes, I've never had a single problem with that. I've had people whose passports expire in the next day or the next like few weeks. I've never had an issue with a document's expiration date. And I'm like, well, And I am fully aware that visa regulations always change, right? So as much as I wanted to be frustrated at my lawyer for knowing this information, it could have been like updated the day before. And who knows? But that was my first attempt, right? And so I felt super defeated. And I'm like, okay, we'll just try again. And we had bought a ticket. This was all in Mexico City. We had to fly from Puerto Vallarta to Mexico City. We bought the flight there, but we were planning on flying standby back. And so what happened is that we tried to fly standby back on Aeromexico, and every single flight was full. And so the 3 o'clock flight was full. The 5 o'clock flight was full. The 9 o'clock flight was full. So we essentially could not get on the plane to go back home. So we kind of just like stayed in the airport for around like 8 hours. And then once we realized we weren't going to be getting back on the plane, heading home that day, we were like, okay, let's go book a hotel. All of the surrounding hotels in the airport were fully booked. So we were like, okay, so we are essentially stuck in the airport. So we had to sleep in the airport, and we had only planned on being there for like a day. So we didn't bring sweatshirts or a overnight bag or anything. I did because I was like overthinking in the sense, but like my dad didn't. He didn't even bring a bag. He just had like stuff in his pocket. So we had to like sleep on the chairs and just wait until the next day. And we ended up buying a ticket back on a different airline. But that was like such a crappy day. First got rejected from the appointment first minute, like the second that my name was called. And then we had to stay in the airport for like 15 hours. And then sleep on just like super uncomfortable chairs in there. But anyways, that was the failed attempt. The very first failed attempt. And so now our goal was to renew my visa, because that was the entire issue as to why I got rejected. My visa expired in February, this month. And then so they were like, okay, we'll just like renew it end of November, December, and then like get a new appointment in like January. But no, of course, this has to be like so incredibly difficult. My visa, you can only renew your visa in the month leading up to it expiring. So we were only able to get it renewed end of January. So I was basically a sitting duck the rest of November, December, beginning of January, just waiting to get this visa renewed. As time was being wasted, right? Because the whole point, the big reason why I wanted to get this Mexican passport or my citizenship to be able to apply for a Mexican passport was to be qualified to go to the ISAs this year. And the actual process of me getting my citizenship after my application goes through, it takes a long time. And so we were already like, okay, essentially, I'm going to miss that chance of competing at the ISAs. And it was really disappointing, just kind of also coming back from the first appointment being like, I lost my chance. Like this was the moment, this was a chance at me being able to go to the ISAs, and now that we have to delay this entire process to try again, I don't think it'll be ready for the ISAs. And it was really sad, honestly. But anyways, we were sitting ducks, essentially, just waiting for my visa to get renewed. And once it was renewed, we got the new appointment date, and we got it for the 23rd of February. And so we had to prepare everything again. I'll go through like the documents of what you need to bring for this process. You have to bring your visa, right? You have to bring your passport. You have to bring your birth certificate and a translated version of the birth certificate, because I'm an American, it's in English, whereas all this process is in Mexico, obviously. So it has to be translated so people can understand it. But the thing about my birth certificate is that when this process then goes through, they are taking my birth certificate and they are not returning it to me. So currently now, I do not have a birth certificate. So we got to get like a copy from like the hospital that I was born at, but whatever. Anyways, so passport, visa, birth certificate, and then you have to get your criminal records. You have to get your local criminal records, and you have to get your federal criminal records. We essentially have to get my criminal records to prove that I have none, because I don't have any criminal records. I just had to like prove that I didn't have any. And so my lawyer was able to get my federal criminal records, but it was my responsibility to get my local criminal records. So leading up to my first appointment, I had to go get these criminal records, and she gave us a link of just like information of how to get it. And they're like, okay, in the state of Nayarit, which is where I live, like there's 6 locations, there's six regions or municipals. I have no idea what it is in English, but there's like 6 sections of this state, and inside each of these sections is a office in order to get your local criminal records. And so the office that I was going into was the one that you get for Valle de Banderas. And so I live in Valle de Banderas, so I had to go to that office. And it had the name, then this paper had the name, so I looked it up on Google, and I know exactly where it was. I'm like, okay, this is easy, simple. And so my dad and I drove to this location, and I went in there and I'm like, hey, I'm here to like request my criminal records. And they're like, this isn't where you go to get your criminal records. And I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, no, this is not where you get your criminal records. And I'm like, well, this is what my lawyer told me. And they're like, yeah, well, this isn't it. You have to go to this place to pay here, and then you have to go to another location. And I'm like, okay. So we knew where to pay, right? So we went over, and it's like the same building as like the DMV. So we had to like wait, and we had to pay. We had to just like wait in line and then just be like, hey, I'm here to pay for my criminal records. And she's like, okay. So like I paid for it, and then I was like, do you actually know where to like pick it up? And she's like, yeah, you have to go to the jail. You have to go to the jail? She's like, yeah, you have to go to the Bucerías jail. And I'm like, okay then. So we drove over there, and there's the jail, but then it's like an area where there's also like a lot of legal offices. So the surrounding area around the jail is for like a lot of other legal proceedings. So I wasn't actually going into the jail. I was just kind of like going around it. And so I had no idea what building I had to go into. I was just told the jail, go to the jail. And so I went up to like this random person in one of the offices, and I'm like, hey, do you know where to like request your criminal records? And they're like, yeah, over there. So I went to this random ass building, and I was like, there was someone at the front desk, and I'm like, hey, I'm here to get my criminal records. They're like, okay, over there. And they pointed towards a door, just like a random ass door, and so I went in, and then there was the licenciada just kind of there, and I'm like, hey, I'm here to get my criminal records. And I thought it was really funny because I am not really the type of person. I don't really look like the type of person that would be asking for their criminal records. One, I'm a young girl, and 2, I do not look Mexican. So they're like, why is this gringa like asking for her criminal records? What you do is that you have to apply, essentially, and you have to request it with some like documents and the payment, obviously, and then you have to wait a week or so to receive it, and you have to go back to the office and pick it up. The first time we did this, I had no way of contacting this woman to see if it was ready or not, and we did it pretty late leading up to my appointment, and so we were cutting it really, really short for this thing to be ready. We went over to the office. It had been like a week since we put in this request, and we were told that it was going to be like around like 2 or 3 days. And so we went to this office, and she said we went back to the office to see if she was there. I kind of just like asked, hey, what's going on? And she wasn't there, and like no one knew where she was. And so someone kind of helped me, and he was like, yeah, I think you should just come tomorrow and come here like early, because usually like there's a line leading up to her office. And I'm like, okay, thank you. And so we went the next day, and that was the day before we had to leave for this appointment. I went into her office, and she wasn't there. And I'm like, oh my god, I literally have to be on an airplane in less than 24 hours, and I need these criminal records for my appointment. And so I asked someone else to help me, and they called her, and they're like, hey, where are you? She's like, oh, I'm coming. Give me 20-40 minutes. They're like, okay. And so I waited almost an hour, and she arrived, but then she had to officially stamp it, but she didn't have the key to the drawer where the stamp was, so she had to like look around and ask people if they've seen the key. I'm just like, oh my god. In the end, I received it, I got it, and everything was fine. I did not have any criminal records, which means they have not caught me. The next day, I went to the appointment, and like I said before, I was rejected, and so we had to wait to try again. But my criminal records have like an expiration date, pretty much, so you're allowed to use that for any legal proceedings 3 months after you received it. And so once we made the new appointment, it was past those 3 months. So we had to go through the entire process again. And fortunately, it was a lot less difficult than the first time because one, I knew what I was doing. And two, she actually called me to tell me that it was ready, and we did it a lot earlier than before, so we weren't cutting it short. But yeah, that's fun to talk about, and I always love telling people like, oh, sorry, I'm kind of busy today, I have to like go get my criminal records, just because everyone's like, what? But anyways, that was one piece of it. Another thing is that what you have to do, like another one of the documents, is that you have to bring 2 copies of everything. And so what they were asking was for 2 copies of your passport, but like every single page. And the whole point is to see all the stamps that you received, because they're not going to take your official passport, right? They're not going to take that away from you. They just want to see all the stamps. And you also have to give them a list of times that you've left and entered the country. And so with the list that you gave them and all the copies of each page of the passport, they're going to see if they kind of match, if that makes sense. I was going through times that I had arrived in the country and the times that they was stamped, and then also in comparing it to the list that we gave them. And this was leading up to the second attempt. Now I'm just going to talk about the second attempt because I already mourned 5 stages of grief that first attempt, and so now we're just worried about the second attempt. I was reviewing the list that I had originally given them because my lawyer just wanted to confirm, and I was looking at the list and also comparing it to my passport, and I realized that a lot of them were wrong. And so I would like go back in my camera roll and double check and be like, oh wait, yeah, these dates are wrong. And so fortunately I did that, and they would have probably rejected me that first time had they seen all these wrong dates. They were just like 1 day off, but I was able to correct all of them except one. So when I went to the Carolina Cup last year, after we went to the Carolina Cup, we stayed with some grandparents, and we just took advantage of the fact that we were in the United States to kind of see our grandparents, and we came back on May 15th. And I was looking at the stamps, and I noticed that May 15th, I wasn't stamped on May 15th, and I'm like, weird. But then I realized I was stamped for March 15th, and then I was like, wait, no, that was literally during a competition here in town. There's no way that I could have left and come back and gotten stamped in March. And then I realized that they messed up the official stamp. They stamped my passport with March instead of May. And I'm just like, oh my God, they messed up. They misstamped my passport. And so I went to my lawyer, and they're like, do you have any like proof that you actually arrived in Mexico in May instead of March? And so I sent like we sent the email receipt that I received when we booked this flight back home. So she was like, okay, that's good, but just a heads up, if the application goes through, the second attempt, during their review process, they could ask for your migratory flow. And essentially your migratory flow is a governmental list almost. Like, so what they do when you go back into Mexico, they scan your visa, and what it does is that it kind of just puts it in the system that your visa was scanned that day, so you arrived into the country that day. And so what you have to do, like your migratory flow, is you sending in an application to request the official scans of your visa, to kind of see the actual like times you left and arrived in the country, just so they could see for themselves whether or not I arrived on March 15th or May 15th. And so what's going to happen is that if during the waiting process of them getting my citizenship ready, if they feel like they want my migratory flow, we will have to request it, spend money requesting this thing to send it to them, and it'll delay the process of me receiving my citizenship. So while they say it can take like 6 months to do, which means I'd receive it in August, there's a very high chance that they will ask for my migratory flow. So it'll unfortunately be arriving who knows how much later than they originally told us. So that's a little bit of a disappointment, considering that my citizenship could get delayed because of a mistake the airport made. but you can't control everything. But anyways, that's kind of like the gist of all the documents. Leading up to the second attempt, I was like very, very nervous because this was also after I heard all of these like other questions from different sources in regards to the exam that I had no idea the answers to. And leading up to this, I had no idea whether I was overprepared or underprepared. And have you ever gotten that feeling where you have something to do at the end of the day, and so the entire day leading up to that task or that event, you literally can't do anything because you're just thinking about that thing that's happening at the end of the day? That was me for an entire week leading up to this application, this request appointment. It was on a Friday, and I could not think about anything else from Monday, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, leading up to Friday for me going to that appointment. It felt so incredibly debilitating and unreachable thinking about me receiving this citizenship, because now I wasn't just worried about the exam, I was now worried about being rejected because of one of my documents. And so I literally could not think about anything else leading up to that appointment other than the thought of getting rejected. Also, I wanted to say this. When you are applying for your Mexican citizenship, you have 2 attempts. The first attempt, if you get rejected, they're like, okay, we'll give you second attempt, and you can try again when there's another spot available for the appointment. But if you get rejected your second attempt, you are then given a 1-year penalty from trying to apply to become a Mexican citizen. And so considering that I was rejected the first time around, going into my second attempt, first of all, the first attempt, we had no idea if it was actually considered my first attempt or what, just because of the way that I was rejected. It's not that I failed the exam, it's the fact that one of my documents was wrong. So we didn't know whether or not that was considered a first attempt, but either way I went into my second attempt not knowing whether or not this was a first attempt or a second attempt. And so if I were to fail that exam or my documents were wrong or anything, I could have been possibly looking at a 1-year penalty from trying to apply to become a Mexican. And that was so incredibly debilitating and scary, and oh my God, you have no idea. And so the day before I had to go, and I was just like studying my flashcards, I could not study my flashcards without wanting to throw up, because studying my flashcards leading up to the appointment, I was like, okay, if I got it wrong, then it's fine. I'll get it right the next time I get to see this flashcard. But knowing that the day before I had my appointment, these last study sessions, it was showing the things that I did know and that I didn't know. And considering it was so close to the exam, it wasn't just like, oh, I'll just get it right the next time. It's like, oh, if I don't know this, I am going to fail. There was no more time to learn things. I either knew it or I didn't know it. And that was so scary. Like, I was just like terrified of studying that last day. I didn't want to study, but it's also like I could not study. And then going to bed that night, when the next day I had to go into Mexico City again, my heart was absolutely racing trying to go to bed. My heart and my body and my brain could not slow down. It was just like so, because of the nerves, it couldn't slow down. It couldn't sleep. It couldn't calm down. And what I ended up doing is that I had to like put on a visualization YouTube video so I could focus my mind on something else, like an actual visualization practice, so that I got distracted and I could actually fall asleep, because I wasn't falling asleep because I was so nervous. And then I woke up at 3 a.m, got ready, and then at 4 drove to the airport, and then at 6 got on the airplane, then flew to Mexico City. All this second time doing it, and I'm just like, oh my God, it's just like so repetitive at this point, even if it was the second time. And this time I actually dressed up really nice. I had never dressed up for like business casual. I don't own nice things, and so I was able to like make it work. And this is the first time I actually dressed up, not like in like a fancy elegant way, but more a business way. But at the end of the day, it was just business casual. But I felt really nice. I felt really good leading up to it physically, but my looks wise, I felt very professional. But I was still absolutely terrified of this appointment. But actually, in the app, there's little articles that the app kind of makes and publishes, and just to kind of like talk about certain parts of this naturalization process. And there was one that they had recently released, and it was a list of around like 5 people like sharing their experiences of the process. And so everything from the documents to the exam to the interview, because there's also an interview section of the appointment. And I was reading it, and everyone was talking about how well the app prepared them for this exam. And these people kind of wrote down some of the questions that they had remembered from the exam and kind of just like talking about it. And they put the question and the answer. And I was almost like quizzing myself reading this article, trying to figure out the answer to these questions before actually seeing the answer that they wrote. And I was able to get all of them right. Like I knew all the answers to the questions. And all these people talking about how the app prepared them for the exam, that really made me calm down and breathe and just reassure myself that like, okay, everything's fine. Leading up to the appointment that day, I did a little like the simulation exam on the app just to kind of test myself and figure things out and everything. And then I met up with my lawyer's assistant and we went over throughout the documents again, and then it was the appointment time, which was terrifying. I went in, my documents were all in check, they were good, and so they sat me down and then they were going to call me again when I was ready for the next step, which was my exam. And so they're like, Alex Ostrowski, or like they said Alex Wynn, because they can't say my last name. No one can say my last name here. But yeah, they said Alex Wynn. And so I walked up, they're like, okay, you're going to take the exam now, all your documents are good, so you're just going to take the exam. And it was like they gave me like a computer screen and like a mouse, and it was like an electronic exam, and there were 10 questions, and I was like, okay, this is what I prepared for, right? This is what I prepared for. I answered everything, and I triple checked everything, and I submitted it. Like you submit it right then and there, and you get your answers right then and there, and I got 8 out of 10. My heart, like the fact that I was so close to failing this exam, 8 out of 10, I just barely made it. I was just like, oh my God, it was like way too close for comfort, honestly. I was low-key not okay with the fact that I got 8 out of 10, but I passed. That was like the thing that I was most scared about for this appointment, was failing that exam. And I passed it, and then I passed the Spanish exam 6 out of 6 because there says 6 questions. You could only get one of them wrong. And I got 6 right, and I got all of them right. So everything was fine with that, and then had to like sign a few things, had to say goodbye to my birth certificate, and then I stepped out, and I could not stop smiling, and I was so happy. I did like a little dance, and my lawyer assistant met up with me, because again, he couldn't go in there with me, and so then I had to like call my dad, and I did play a little trick on him. I acted like I was crying, acted like I was rejected again, and he was so terrified. And then I just went, just kidding, and he was not happy. He was like, don't do that to me, like ever. Like I forgot what he said, but he was just like, don't do that. And I'm like, hee hee, can't do anything. I'm like on the other side of the country. That was me officially sending in my application to become a Mexican. And that's the story. And anything can happen in the next few months. I could be told that like, hey, you're not qualified for some random reason. Also, I did the interview. This is like during my appointment, I did the interview. It's literally just like they record you and just ask like, why do you want to become a Mexican? And so I said like, oh, the culture, grew up here. And also I want to represent Mexico in my sport. And so they're like, cool. And they also, right then and there, they took a photo for me for my citizenship paperwork. And so that was cool, because that photo that they took of me, if everything works, will be on my citizenship paper. And that'll be like my mock birth certificate for anything legal, any legal proceeding that I do here in Mexico. Anything can change in the next few months. When they're going through my document, they could not be happy with a mistake on my passport, so they wouldn't let me. There's so many things that could cause it to possibly not go through or to delay it in some way. So really at the moment, it is just a waiting game. But you are looking at someone who could probably, in this year become a official Mexican citizen. And I'm so happy that this weight of that appointment has been lifted off my chest. It's so relieving and relaxing, and now I can like focus on other things. And I will also possibly have my part of my identity confirmed, right? Because I grew up in Mexico for my entire life without like actually legally being one. So now that I will be one, it just kind of has my identity confirmed. I'm not just gonna be a American living in Mexico. I will be a Mexican. And I will still be a dual citizen. I'll have my American passport and my Mexican passport. I'm not gonna give up my American citizenship anytime soon. So yeah, that is my story. That's what's been happening in the past several months. This second appointment, I didn't tell anyone. I really didn't tell anyone that I was doing this second appointment, because I remember the first time I did it, I told everyone. And so everyone was like, oh my God, how'd it go? And I had to tell them that I got rejected. So this time around, I didn't tell anyone. So if I didn't get through, I just could brush it under the rug. I didn't have to tell anyone my results. I just could try again. And then if I did successfully do it, I could then tell people. But even then, I don't really want to be super duper open about it. I'm not going to openly tell people until I have that citizenship paper in my hand. I have been talking here for over an hour. This is probably the longest episode I have filmed. I will leave it here. Thank you so much for listening. I'm so happy I can finally talk about this, because it has been something that's been on my mind for a very long time. I hope you liked my storytelling. I hope it wasn't incredibly mumbo jumbled, because there's so many things that went into this, honestly, and there's so many funny side stories. Not funny side stories, because a lot of them with my criminal records and my passport, but there's a lot of side stories and side tangents and everything. But anyways, again, thank you so much for listening or watching. Make sure to rate my podcast on Spotify or Apple, or comment and subscribe if you're on YouTube, and I will catch you guys later. Bye-bye.